Mmm.
Hi, and welcome back to Hot Off the Press, the show about new releases and the authors that bring them to you. I'm your host, Jim Nettles, and let's go around and see who all is bringing in some stuff to add to that to-be-read pile for all those brand new Kindles. So, Frank, you're up first.
Hi, my name is Frank W. Butterfield, and I'm the author of 90-something mysteries, romance, historical fiction, all with gay main characters. And as always, I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Seressia?
I'm Seressia Glass. I write rom-coms, paranormal romance, urban fantasy, contemporary romances, and I'm real happy to be here.
VG?
I'm VG Harrison, and I write science fiction under this pen name. I have another pen name, Marcia Collette, that I write YA, urban fantasy, paranormal romance. And this is my first time here.
Nice.
Welcome. Megan?
Hi, I'm Meghan Maslow. I also write gay fantasy romance, and I have about 10 or 11 books out. I don't know. I haven't counted lately. So that's what I do.
Dennis?
Hi, I'm Dennis Myers, and I write science fiction in the far future, and I have characters of all different types in my books.
So let's talk a little bit about, with all of these new offerings, just kind of a big picture, right? You know, what kind of world are we stepping into? What's the setup? You know, what's the big picture? So Frank, I'll go to you first for this one.
Well, the first part of the big picture is the picture behind me, which is 1950s Provincetown. I don't live in Provincetown now. I live in Daytona Beach, kind of down the coast a bit. This is the second book in this particular series. It is centered around Carter Jones, who is the husband of Nick Williams, who's the primary character in my first initial series. And so this is where Carter's going off on his own and doing little investigations that nobody really knows about except him. And he ends up in Provincetown trying to take care of a problem that has come up with his stepbrother, who is being blackmailed. And so Carter, who knows a little bit about that, is trying to help him out and figure out how to not only get whoever is doing the blackmailing off their back, and also try and figure out what else is going on, because there's a lot more than just that. So, but that's where we start. And it's a fun story to write because we get inside his head, which we don't normally do in the other stories that he's in. And he's a lot more complicated on the inside than it appears to be on the outside. And I really enjoy writing from his perspective. So that's where we're at.
And the other series he comes out of is which one?
It's the Nick Williams Mysteries. And Nick Williams is his husband. That's what they call it themselves, that in the 50s. And that series has gone all the way up to 1983 at this point. And this story that I'm writing on here has taken me about a year to work on, and it's been very slow for me to get to, but I think it's going to be worth it when it's finally done.
Seressia?
My current latest release is Game On. It is about a Black female gamer pointing out lack of diversity in video games, online games. And she pretty much takes on any and all comers with receipts and all of that. And so she takes on a particular game that she had loved before, but discovered that there were some Easter eggs that were very problematic. So she calls it out, and the head of the gaming company ends up investigating her and reaching out to her, and finds out that she's going to be attending the same game conference, and makes her an offer she can't refuse, basically.
VG.
Abandoned Station is the first book in my Dyson Bridge series, and it takes place, well, part of it takes place in an alternate Earth, different time. And it's all done in a space station, but something happens to the space station where it explodes and pretty much catapults everybody into a new dimension that looks very much like our Earth instead. And it's told through the perspective of my lead character, Professor Meridia Vale. She's a mechanical engineer, and she's really good at what she does. And the problem is she's really not good with people. And she really finds out how good she is with people when she ends up on this alternate Earth along with the rest of her crew, who are pretty much like fish out of water. I mean, they even get, confused by things like seatbelts because they just don't have them where she is. And so she also learns that there's a big problem on the space station that basically came across the dimensions with them, and that it's hurling towards Earth. Whatever the Earthers of our Earth did to rescue the crew, it knocked the space station off course. And right now, they don't know whether to treat that space station as a weapon or whether to let the astronauts go back up there, Meridia Vale and her crew, to fix the course, or are they going to blow up the Earth in the process? The new Earthers just don't trust them, and the feeling is mutual, and there are billions of lives at stake, so they need to figure it out fast.
Megan?
So I wrote a book for Christmas this year, which I've never done a Christmas story before. It's called Cthulhu for Christmas. I always write something with magic in it. It has to have, some sort of fantasy element, whether it's paranormal, whether it's fantasy. I like to have some sort of mystery. I always love a good dead body in a story. So I had to figure out how to put that into a Christmas story, so make it Christmassy. And I always like to have comedy in my stories, whether it's, it can be a sarcastic, it can be more of a sardonic. I mean, it just depends on the book. And again, this is Christmas, so it needs to be a little lighter humor in it. And so my story really is about, it's the first world I've written where it's a paranormal, but you have people who I call them nomas, so non-magicals. They don't know that magic exists. And my main character, Zen King, is a noma, and so he doesn't know that magic exists, and he's been in love with his best friend forever, who he thinks is not interested in him, thinks he's straight. It's not that his friend is straight. It's that his friend is magical and can't tell him. I created an isle that's actually approximately where Kent Island is off of the coast of Maryland. So it's pretty close to Annapolis and Baltimore and all of that. And this island has a personality of its own. But this actually came out of a multi-author series. And so the two prompts were, it must be a winter holiday. So I chose Christmas, and and one of the main characters must have tentacles, which I thought, well, okay, challenge accepted. And so that becomes a little bit of surprise in the story and how that comes about. It's magic that's gone very wrong.
Dennis?
This book is the fourth of my series and the last, Stolen Dreams. Everything that's been building up in the last books, including the betrayals that were the hallmark of broken trust, comes to head in Stolen Dreams. And what was the corporate federation is now shattered. Allied is in pieces, and it's a big fight. Basically to see who's going to be in control of humanity's future.
So now that we've got a good idea as to kinds of stories we're stepping into, now it becomes the important part. Because every story really is about the people. It's about the characters. It's who we get to hang out with, and sometimes who the conflicts happen with. So, Seressia, why don't you tell us a little bit more about who we're going to be hanging out with at this point?
Well, Samara and Aaron, they both, family is very important to both of them. They spend Sunday dinners with their families, their parents, and they have their friends that they hang around with. So it's all about these friendships, and they're finding common ground as they start to work together. So basically, when she calls them out, they meet at the conference, he goes undercover as just a regular gamer and starts talking to her and her gamer personality persona about games and what she would change if she could, things that she feels that will be improvements. So he's basically kind of like, we're having a good discussion, but it's also kind of like an interview. Then he asked for a phone number to kind of follow up, and she's not thinking about it because it was a good vibe of a conversation. So she gives him her phone number under her real name, which he then takes and discovers who she really is. And it ends up being a moment of serendipity because in her real life, she is a diversity consultant. So he basically hires her to work on reviewing his games for problematic content, because he did find that Easter egg and basically laid waste to the people who put that in there. Now they're working on cleaning up his products because he's trying to get a certification for making games accessible to neurodivergent players as well as everyone else. So they're working together. So they're basically antagonists to colleagues, to friends, to lovers. It's basically what the story is about as they bond over their love of games.
BG? Sounds like we've got a lot of people to go meet in this one.
There is a big cast. The story mostly focuses around Meridia Vale, and the story starts out with her personal life is a mess. She's in the middle of a divorce, a very bitter divorce that gets aired throughout the entire space station accidentally, and it's like she thinks her whole world has exploded with this divorce, and she has no idea what's coming next. Because while she's in space, she's basically she's not really working on any spaceships or anything like that. She's doing improvements to the current space station that's out there. And so that's where her head is completely, and that's where she wants it to be. But in the meantime, she's working with her crew. There's like over 100+ people on her space station, which is called the Bridgeway. There's one point in the book, they even refer to the ISS as a space heap because it's just too small, too cramped, and just ridiculous. Like, why would anybody make this for space? So for them, the ISS is basically like a porta potty compared to their space station. So they've got this big, great space station. They're about to do all of these launches into space. So she's prepping the space station for even traveling to Mars. They're about to launch this telescope even deeper into space past the Kuiper belt. And all of a sudden, they know that there's a solar flare coming. But the problem is that the solar flare just wreaks havoc on the space station, and coupled with that, between all the technology that's on board the Bridgeway, everything that's going on, it all makes a chain reaction, and it just catapults them into this new time-space dimension. And the Earth that they are faced with now is the one that looks like ours. And the problem is that even though all the nations got together and rescued these people off this really weird thing that's floating out in their orbit, it also kind of drove the whole world apart at the same time. And Meridia and her team are just stuck in the middle of this crisis where it's come down to the point where if any nation goes near the space station and tries to use it as a weapon or anything, they will launch nukes at it. And Meridia and her team are like, are we talking like nuclear weapons, like blow up the Earth, that contaminate the atmosphere? Are you people crazy? But that's what they're faced with because the tensions are so high across the world. Nobody knows what to make of their space station. Nobody's talking to them. All the astronauts, Meridia, all the astronauts come from various different countries. So when they were rescued from the space station, they were all shipped back to their respective countries when that never should have happened in the first place. So Meridia and her team, of course, are stuck in the US, and they can't talk to the people that they need to talk to because they're stuck in other places. There's a West Canada. There's only one Korea. There's not a North and South. So they are completely like fish out of water. And somehow Meridia has to figure out how to bridge the gap between all these people. And the only way they really know how to do it is to get rid of the government, basically kick the government aside and go to universities, scientists, anybody they can think of outside of the government to help them make sense of what's going on. And so they hatch a plan to do just that. The problem is it's a little bit more complicated than they think, because they're dealing, even though these people have no technology compared to theirs, it's not as easy breaking out of their captivity as they think it's going to be.
Megan, who are going to be hanging out with this one, besides an elder god?
Yeah. Well, Old Bay Isle itself is a character, I should say up front. It takes, it has, I wouldn't say sentience exactly, but it has its own opinions on things, and it's a haven for magical users. So it becomes the place itself becomes a pretty important character, but the main character is Zen King. It's told through his perspective. And again, he's desperately in love with his best friend. He's a police officer who can't seem to advance through the ranks, doesn't know why. Again, a lot of it is because he's not magical. And he's been actually offered a position with the FBI, which he's decided to take and move to the mainland, Greenbelt, because that's where the FBI is moving. So I took a little bit of liberty there to move them there already. And his best friend, Greg Criswell, who is sort of the golden boy, his family has money, he's a private school, versus Zen King moved to the Isle when he was 12. He was a foster kid. And he grew up there on the Isle, but he's never been considered local, even though he's been there more than half his life now, because again, there's this, there's a lot of class divides. There's a lot of magical, non-magical divides that part he's unaware of. And so his foster mom also is quite the character. She's actually modeled partially after a cousin of mine who was a Lady Marine, and was just, she was hard, but she had took in a lot of kids. She would take in teenagers, a lot of LGBTQ youth. She still does. And, her kids' friends who would get tossed out of their homes. But when you lived with her, you learned skills, and she did not baby you. And so his foster mom is very similar to that, who he still has a very close relationship with. And so she's kind of a important character in all of this as well.
Dennis?
Yeah, I've got 7 viewpoint characters this book that I'm juggling. There's a lot going on. Real quick, Dawn, of course, the leader of Allied Industries. In Broken Trust, we saw August Monarch was the head of the Corporate Federation. He was, angry and cruel, and he's a horrible leader, and he gets killed. Octavian Monarch takes over, and he dials it up to 11, and Dawn doesn't know how to deal with that. Her goal is to save as many lives as possible. Then we're following Captain Patricia Kipeth, who is now captain of the Pang Yu, the hero ship of the series. And since she's new to command and in the heat of battle, she has to deal with losing crew members. And in the end, she has to decide, what is she willing to risk in terms of the lives of her crew in order to accomplish the mission? Then there's Misa Kabato from the in Broken Trust. She's the one who spent most of the time in seclusion. She's been through a little bit of trauma, had to have her legs regrown. She just wants to retire. So she goes home and retires, and she's done. And then she gets drafted. So Darren, he is on Mars, and he is trying to balance factions, because yes, he's friends with the Allied people, but he doesn't want Monarch to be mad at him because they're bombing people now, killing people. We're also following Brenna, who was first introduced in the first book as the young ensign just getting qualified. Turns out she's a really brilliant engineer, and she teams up with another character, Deng Li Min. Li is a director. She's one of the people who runs the big technology stuff, researching the new jump engine. And so that whole story plays out as they're playing hide and seek with the bad guys. And last, of course, finally, Ted, my Marine, who sees a little bit of action, and spoiler, he's not alone because there's Deborah. So they're on the cover. So that's who we're following. And like I said, there's a lot of pieces, and it all culminates in a whole new structure for government for the human race.
So, Frank, how about you? Let's find out a little bit more about who we're going to be hanging out with in this one.
Well, so Carter, who is the main character, and everything is from his perspective. This story actually is shoehorned between several books that I've already written. And when I came up with the idea, I realized when it needed to happen. And then I realized that it was going to be kind of a stretch to be able to kind of fit this story into already existing canon within this series, within the Nick Williams series. But the setup is that Carter's mother has remarried, and his stepfather, Ed, has two sons, and one of them, Bobby, when everybody was getting to know everybody, Bobby was just not having it with the fact that his new stepbrother was gay and that he was marrying into this kind of family, and it's 1954, so he really wasn't having it. But it turns out, of course, that Bobby himself is gay, and that the reason why he's being blackmailed is because of that. And also because he's connected to Carter and Nick is very wealthy. And so the blackmailer thinks that he can probably get a lot of money out of that connection. So we got those two going on, that their dynamic, and the fact that Bobby has been just not very nice at all up to this point. And so Carter's going to have to kind of swoop in and save him. And he's been asked by Ed, his stepfather, not to tell anybody that he's doing this. So he's not telling Nick about it. So it's kind of messy in that way. But so we get to know Carter, but we also get to know more about Bobby and his backstory and kind of what he's been dealing with and some of the losses that have led him to kind of have the attitude he's had up to this point, and how he got into this mess. But there's another character that kind of I wasn't really thinking about. I mean, he was just one of these incidental characters who's kind of taken on a bigger role than I was expecting, who's more or less in the background. And it's a woman who owns this boarding house where, while Carter's in Provincetown, which at the time didn't really have, it had maybe one or two hotels, but there wasn't really anywhere to stay. Everybody stayed at guest houses, just like they do now, but even more so then. And so it's this boarding house that I put in a place in town that doesn't really exist, that's run by this woman who's really, really eccentric, and the other people live in the house are all really interesting. And then there's a dog that I never ever write about animals. I'll occasionally write about cats, very, very little. But this dog kind of like jumped into the story literally, and I really had no idea as I was writing it where he was going to lead. And he ends up being kind of a pivotal part to the story. But that just was, and the dog is kind of one of my favorite characters in this book, to be quite honest, because he's just really cute and just kind of jumps in where he's not wanted. But in the end, as the story kind of comes to its conclusion, Carter has two helpers that he had in the first book. And I should have said, the first book was the case of the jilted first secretary. And the second book, the one I'm talking about here, is the case of the betrayed brother. And Carter, in the previous book, had two helpers that worked with him and Nick in the private detective company they have in San Francisco. And one of them is real smart and just kind of like does everything by the book and all this stuff. But the other one is this guy named Sam, who is much older than Carter and was born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire in what is now Czechoslovakia, or what at 1954 is Czechoslovakia, which is now the Czech Republic. But he also has this great backstory where he went to Moscow in the 1920s because he wanted to see what was going on. He was young. He wanted to find out what was happening after the revolution. And he gets to meet all these people, and some of them kind of make their way into this story. So getting to write about Sam is always a lot of fun because he is the one who he can get anywhere and kind of talk to anybody and kind of finagle his way into any situation, and is a really great ally to have. You just don't really want to know how exactly he did everything he did. and you're not quite certain how many bodies there are kind of in the background to enable him to do what he does. So that's kind of part of the story as well.
So looking at kind of all the big stories we're looking at here, one of the fun things is always, as a writer, is being able to go in and do a bunch of research and see what kind of rabbit holes you trip down. Sometimes we surprise ourselves with the things that we're like, oh, I didn't expect that character to do that. Sometimes it is you find out how something works that you never thought you'd ever research in your life. But again, that's the fun part of being a writer is, forget about getting the words to the paper. We just want to have an idea how stuff works. So VG, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Oh, no.
What was something you learned, some research rabbit hole you tripped down? What was one of the things that just about working on this project that you learned something?
I went so far down the quantum physics hole that my editor was like, okay, are you writing a book or a science paper? So I learned all about singularities, black holes, even learned about the golden spiral, all sorts of things, because I just wanted to make sure I got the science right more than anything. In fact, I like to make the science right to the point that anybody can follow it. So it's like, we're not talking college level. We're going to keep this simple, but I got to get in some of these facts. And because I want to make it as realistic as possible. But the problem is that I get so dragged down so far in the hole that I have to remember that I am writing a novel for like the layman. I'm writing a novel for like normal people so that they can follow it and they can read it. And like I said, I got dinged so many times by my editor with this book. She just tore me a new one. She's like, you need to rewrite some of this, and this is the reason why. I don't know what I'm reading. I mean, she's like, it's a great book. I love the book. I love the characters. But you get so caught up in the science facts of orbital speeds, gravitational pulls, things like that, that she's like, you're killing me with it. So I had to go back and do a lot of rewrites. I had to I either dull down the science or take some of it out. So I found the best thing to do was to actually write my characters kind of like around it. So they're kind of in a way having fun with it, so to speak. And that was how I got through some of it. I also needed to learn a lot about history. Now, history is not my favorite subject. I am not good at history at all. But considering this is an alternate universe, there are some changes that had to be made in history. For instance, the Great Space Race was a choice between either, I think it was putting a satellite in space or what was it? It was launching a satellite in space or launching a man in space. I can't remember which. Well, we went one way, whereas in my book, they went a different way. And that's how they ended up with the technological feat that they did today. So I had to go back and do a little bit of research, a little bit of history and things like that. I had to read up about, mostly, like I said, about the Great Space Race and how that was done, choices and decisions that were made then to give us the world that we have today. I changed those decisions to give my characters the world that they live in today. So I kind of got a little bit caught up in the history of things as well. But by doing that, I was at least able to get a really good setting or an idea of where my characters come from. For instance, there was a lot less wars in their world, but as horrible as it may sound, there's overcrowding in Meridia's world. So there's people living on seasteads, just like people living in RV parks right now. I mean, because it's just so overcrowded. And so those were decisions that were made way back when, where people decided science was the number one thing. This is what they needed to do to focus on to get out of whatever wars they had back then. Focused on what was going to happen in the tomorrow. And to do that, they did it through science and technology. And like I said before, that's the reason why they are where they are today. So I had to do my own research in that respect. But I think the thing that I went down the deepest and the hardest in was the science stuff, for sure. No doubts about it. Yeah.
Megan, how about you?
Well, I had a few different ones. Lighthouses were a big one for me. I even went and I was printing off plans for different lighthouses. I really had to think about how I wanted to use it for a scene. Again, there's a lot of myth around this island. There's been some odd murders going on. The lighthouse becomes a very central place on the Isle. I also had to research cephalopods. So, I wanted to understand a little bit more about tentacles and arms and the different creatures that had them. I ended up doing some research on caribou. This town, and during the holiday season, you're not allowed to drive downtown. They have sleighs that are pulled by caribou. I have a sort of like the dog, that crept into Frank's story. I have a beaver that crept into mine named Randy. He called him at one point a cute little guy or something. And one of my editors is like, you realize a full grown beaver is between 40 and 80 pounds, right? So then I had to go research beavers because well, can he call him a little guy? He's only, how big is he? And so, things like that you find that, make about one sentence of your book, but you end up spending several hours at least figuring this stuff out. So, yeah.
Dennis?
I had two different areas of research that stand out for me. The first one was because of all the new locations in the outer solar system, I found myself poring over maps of moons of the outer planets and whatnot, and I found a little crater called Falstaff. And I knew at that point that had to be in the book. So as a nod and a thank you to the folks at Falstaff for their support and friendship, especially the big guy, John Hartness. That crater's for you, guy. The other one is we end up visiting a floating city in the atmosphere of Venus. So I did a lot of research on the makeup of the atmosphere and figured out a whole economic structure for why they're there, what they're doing there. That was, and some of the effects that the atmosphere has on the materials, that was fun to do. And the big thing that stood out was what it would smell like. And I made that a pretty big part of the story.
Frank?
I went down kind of two research rabbit holes, one of which is really, I think, kind of ridiculous, but I think it's worth mentioning. I am not an athletic person at all. Carter is a bodybuilder, like extraordinaire, and a boxer. And so I wrote a scene where when I say I wrote a scene, I mean, it became obvious that there had to be a scene where he's boxing. And so I did a whole thing, and I had to go back and read and watch. And I wanted to watch stuff from the 50s to see if there was anything at all, which was very hard to find, of boxers, and watch what they were doing and and then take it down from like what would be filmed, which would be professional boxing, down to like what would happen in a gym. Because it's a central part of the first part of the story, and then it becomes a central part of the kind of the resolution of the story. And so getting really clear about that, and also because if Carter's going to narrate it or is going to be talking about it, he's going to know it intimately. And so I had to kind of figure out how to do that. But since I have absolutely no clue at all. But I just, read what people had written about it and tried my best to do that. I guess I need a boxing sensitivity reader probably at some point. But the other thing, this one is also kind of ridiculous, but it's kind of become this thing for me. One of my favorite parts of writing historical fiction is going back and reading old newspapers. Mm. And since I started writing, I have discovered how easy it is to find digitized newspapers, which I didn't even know existed, really. Provincetown, and so part of the reason I need to do this, particularly with this story, is that the nice thing about Provincetown is the map of Provincetown as it exists today is about 200 years old. And it's the street numbers, everything is all pretty much the same and has been for a really, really long time. There hasn't been any renumbering or renaming of streets, which is unlike here in Daytona Beach, which has had several renamings and renumberings, which is very confusing, going back into the 40s. But there, it's really solid. So that's great. So the Provincetown Library has digitized copies of the weekly paper, I guess it was semi-weekly at the time, called The Advocate. And I basically found myself reading the entire, like, all of 1953 and all of 1954, and just reading. And there were a couple of things that stood out to me. One is I used to live there. And so I know the politics of the town council and the selectmen were the council members. And P-Town has a definite New England. We meet once a year, and all decisions are made for spending and stuff like that are made during the town meeting. It could go for 2 or 3 days. It's in the dead of winter, so it's only really for people, who are voters or landowners and things like that. So I went into all that stuff, and what I discovered is that, unsurprisingly, the things that are going on there now and were going on there 30 years ago when I lived there were also going on in the 50s, which is there's like a handful of people who own a lot of real estate, and pretty much what they want is what everybody gets. And it didn't take long to figure out who those people were back in the 50s. So it was kind of entertaining watching the little stories go back and forth, like little tiny mentions about different things. And you're like, I bet there was a big, huge fight about this, and it's like barely being mentioned here. So going down into that, and then also watching or reading the paper to see what the difference is between, like, the winter when there's nobody there, just the people who live there are the only ones there, versus the summer when everything kind of explodes. And that was happening then just as much as it's happening now. And that was a lot of fun. But I really probably spent a week reading this paper, and I just couldn't, it was like I couldn't stop. I couldn't wait to get up in the morning to go read the next articles, because I just kept finding all these little tidbits, not quite as cool as like finding a valley on a moon and naming it Falstaff, which is really awesome. And it's totally something I would do. But little things like that I inserted into the story to give it color, probably things that nobody else would really notice, but that mean a lot to me. So but the reading newspapers thing just kind of got out of control with this book, because I just couldn't stop reading, because Provincetown is like an ongoing soap opera. It is now, it was when I lived there, and it certainly was then. It's just this continuing story, because it's only like 4,000 full-time residents. So there's a lot going on with just a few people. So it was a lot of fun.
Just to be clear, Falstaff is a real crater. I just used it in the story.
Well, I'm sorry. Yes, yeah. Right. Yes.
And Seressia, how about you? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Frank.
No, that was it.
All right. How about you, Seressia?
For research, I did a lot of research into neurodivergency. Found out that there actually is a certification for neurodivergency in gaming. So I was able to make that one of the focus and impetus for this hero, for Aaron to be working with Samara on this to get that certification. Also, his younger brother is nonverbal autistic, and I based him actually off of my youngest nephew. So it was kind of to pay homage to my youngest nephew, and also to my sister for raising 3 children on the spectrum, and just knowing what she was going through to give them, a regular, normal life. And they just are who they are. And it's up to us to kind of learn how to communicate with them and not, make them other for some reason. So I did a lot of research into that and went down the rabbit hole on that. Did a lot of research on rare video games, some that I hadn't heard of before. So because Aaron has a expansive collection, and that's actually what Aaron and Samara bonded on, was his rare video game collection, and then of course playing some of his games that he had there, while also working through the catalog of his games for his gaming company. So a lot of fun research, a lot of deep rabbit hole research, going to actually on social media, the former Bird app when there was a big dust up a few years ago about gaming and puppies and all of that kind of stuff that went on, and people being doxxed. So I used some of that ripped from the headlines kind of stuff to put also in the story to make so that people could understand why Samara was as cautious as she was, not blending her gaming profile with her real life profile. So until she gets outed by the bad guy, and then mayhem and foolishness ensues.
Please tell me one of those special cartridges was an ET cartridge.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you very well.
Oh, the ET games that got buried because the game was so bad that.
Right, and now it's a rare thing. Things that were found in a trash heap, things like that.
I played that game on Atari.
Uh-huh. Well, it sounds like we've got a bunch of people to stack up stuff on the to be read piles. But before we go, let's make sure everybody knows where to find you guys. Website, social media, and of course, best places to go get those books. So, Frank, you're up first.
Well, my name is Frank W. Butterfield, and that's my website, frankwbutterfield.com. You can find me there. You can find me on Facebook, on Instagram if you like pictures of the ocean. And my books are on Amazon, and they're also wide. This book, when it's released, which is going to be in the next 2 or 3 weeks, will be on KDP. On Kindle Unlimited for the first 90 days, and then it'll go wide. But I'm pretty much everywhere. So, and thanks again for having me. This is really great, as always.
Seressia?
You can find me at Seressia.com is my website, at Seressia on the X app and on Facebook, at Seressia Glass on Instagram and TikTok.
VG?
You can find me at vgharrison.com, or you can find my other surname or my other pen name, MarciaCollette.com. I kind of fuse the two, so to speak. So I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I figured out how to use Blue Sky recently. So wish me luck with that one. But yeah, I am there. So yeah.
Meghan?
So I'm Meghan Maslow on just about every platform. I mean, there is. So the easiest ones to find me are obviously my website, meghanmaslow.com. On Facebook, I've got my author page. I've got a personal page. I've got a group that's Maslow's Mischief, Magic, and Murder. I'm on Insta. I'm technically still on the X, but I don't use it very much. It's just, those are just release posts and stuff. So, but I'm very active on the others.
Dennis?
And I'm Dennis Myers. You can find me at automatedempire.com. I have all of my social media links there. I will soon be on DennisMMyers.com. I actually went out and bought the domain. And I have a strange habit of forgetting at least one character every time I list the characters that I'm doing, and telling the story about Falstaff. As soon as I was done, I realized, oh yeah, I'm published by Chris Kennedy Publishing over here, and I put in a main character, a main viewpoint character named Sonia Kennedy in the book. She's, one of the pivotal characters. And of course, since I know another Kennedy, I made her a doctor. So she is referred to as Dr. Kennedy. Covers.
Since we both know Dr. Kennedy.
My books are available on Amazon.com, Kindle Unlimited, and my first book, Final Assembly, has made the finalist list for the Webster Award here in Virginia. So wish me luck.
And I've had the pleasure of being your host, Jim Nettles, and you can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentialsworkshops.com, creatingpros.com, and of course, here at ConTinual. And we'll see you guys again soon. Go stack up those to be read piles.